All right, APUS history people, this is the beginning of a new year, and it's 2015. It's a new unit number 7 here, and the sheet that I'm working off of is not the study guide. This is the review sheet, so you may not have it yet. If you're sitting at home marching along with the study guide, this may take some bouncing around, but I wanted to base these review videos based on the review guide that I'm working with, and you don't have that yet, but when I get it, I will get it to you, so this will make more sense then. Okay, here we go. We're going to have 3 videos, and the first one is going to focus on the big theme of government activism, which is big during the period 1898 to 1945. Here we go. Let me read. Huge overall theme: an increasingly pluralistic United States debated the proper degree of government activism. As our sub-theme, governmental, political, and social organizations struggled to address the effects of large-scale industrialization, economic uncertainty, and related social changes such as urbanization and mass migration. My goal here then will be to talk about this overall sense of government activism. How did the United States, over the course of the 1900s, the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, begin to become more actively engaged in the everyday lives of Americans? We're going to go from a government that Thomas Jefferson said was best when it did the least, to a government that's going to be doing more and more. Let's start. Looking at the top of my page, we begin with the progressives. Who are they trying to help? The progressives are chiefly trying to help immigrants living in urban areas, people who are crunched into the crowded living conditions of the cities, who are working enormous numbers of hours, whose lives are being shortened by the industrial process. That's the problems that are most keenly being tried to help here. Where? Generally, it's East Coast American industrialized places. It's Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. I know that's not all East Coast, but you get the big idea. Generally, it's not as much in the West Coast. Examples of progressive reformers and the problem they addressed. Sinclair. Okay, when we talk about Sinclair, we're talking about muckraking at its best. Here's what it's like to make the meat in America. Here's the horrendous working conditions. What's he trying to do? He's trying to bring awareness to the process by which American food is made and the processes that American workers go through so that we can begin to address that. We will eventually see that addressed a little bit later on here. Give us a couple minutes. Adams. Jane Addams is an activist helping out immigrant women. Her Hull House is a halfway house or a settlement home designed to try and improve the general situation of immigrant women living in America. So many of them without husbands, without men in their lives, living homeless on the streets with their children. This is a place where they can go to get job training, someone to watch the kids for a little while. That's an increase in the daily role. Sanger. Margaret Sanger wants to open birth control clinics that educate immigrant women on how to decrease family size and therefore increase the overall quality of life for each child in the family. La Follette. Robert La Follette's a Wisconsin progressive who's engaged in trying to make the government more responsive to the people. We do that by introducing things like the initiative and the recall and also the direct primary. All of those are going to give people a better chance of controlling their government. Now, each of those is not really the government strong and activist, but they are examples of how the United States society is brewing to try and get greater activism. That's looking to the government to say, how can we improve conditions for people who live here? The next section asks us about this theme with Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Keep in mind that both Roosevelt and Wilson are progressive presidents, but they're not the same party. That's the idea with progressivism or activism, if you like, is that it spans both political parties. Teddy Roosevelt's a conservative Republican who later on perhaps becomes more of a liberal Republican, if you like, but Woodrow Wilson is a Democrat. They're from different political parties. They're not from the same movement. How did they use trust busting as a progressive reform? Now, trust busting is the breaking up of large businesses, businesses that were considered too big and too inefficient for American life. How could they hurt Americans? Well, if you have a business that's too large, what it can do is use that market share to begin to control prices, and as a result of that, it can conflict with the best interests of the market, right? Roosevelt's going to use what's called the Sherman Antitrust Act. The language there is that any business in restraint of trade could be broken up by the government. Now, Roosevelt thinks he should do this individually. Woodrow Wilson, 2 presidents later, is going to create the Federal Trade Commission and the Clayton Antitrust Act to put more teeth into the legislation, but also so that an impartial body, the government itself, can break up those businesses and not Woodrow Wilson in a direct sense. Food reform. Roosevelt is interested in trying to make sure that the food that we consume, see a note back up top here to our man Upton Sinclair, that the food that we are consuming is clean, that it's appropriately prepared, that it's not tainted in any way, that there's an honest compact or contract between the people who buy the food and the people who provide the food. If that's not true, then the government is allowing businesses to take advantage of the small consumer, right? The only thing strong enough in American society that can rein in the power of these big businesses is the government. That's the idea with the progressive movement. Like it or don't like it, that's the idea. Banking reform. Wilson's responsible for the creation of the Federal Reserve System, which is a regulatory bank that governs or controls the amount of money in the circulation in the United States and assures or tries to assure that there are less ups and downs in the overall process of American society. Now, are there still going to be problems? Yeah. There are still going to be depressions. There are still going to be ups and downs in the economy, but hopefully the Federal Reserve can help that. Moving to the bottom of the list, talking about World War I progressive movements. Both of these movements, both prohibition and women's voting, are an attempt by the society to get the government to intervene to make the society better, right? That's a progressive idea. We got to have a more active government that's going to intervene and make things go more smoothly. Prohibition, we're going to limit the consumption and the production of alcohol, because by doing so, we can protect people from making the poor decision of drinking alcohol. Now, this is a horrendous failure. We talked about that in class. But the progressive idea is that people aren't capable of controlling their consumption of alcohol. The government needs to get involved with that. Okay? Women's voting. The idea behind why women should vote, particularly at this moment, is that women, having worked hard during World War I, and worked hard in every generation prior to that, we should say, really need to be a voice within the government. If our goal is to have a government that's responsive to the ideas and to the voices of America, we can't leave half of the voices out and say that's a just voice. Flipping the page, about halfway home. What caused the Great Depression? The Great Depression was caused by a number of factors. One, there were a lot of sick sectors of the economy, areas of the economy that had never really recovered from the post-World War I boom and bust. The stock market crashed due to over-speculation. Legislation passed by President Hoover, like the Smoot-Hawley tariff, like, for instance, raising taxes. All of those are harmful in taking what could have been sort of a short depression and making it to a long, profound depression. When FDR becomes president, his goal is to try and end the depression. Now, this is kind of the high moment of government involvement, government activism. FDR doesn't necessarily believe the government should get involved and stay involved forever, though. He does believe that there are areas that we have to reform, that we have to try and assure we never have this problem again. One of those is banking. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation's job is to assure that deposits in guaranteed banks are assured to be there by the federal government. If people have trust in their banks, they are less likely to remove their money from the banks, and if the money stays in the banks, then people can use that to loan it out and make businesses happen. Okay, when people make a run on the bank or they withdraw all their money, the banks lose the ability to loan it out, and that's going to hurt the creation of new businesses. So the FDIC should be a long-term program that is government activism by protecting your deposits in banks. The CCC, this is supposed to be a short one. Civilian Conservation Corps. Let's take the homeless, out-of-work young men of America and let's put them to work doing conservation work. Build some trails, rake some leaves, do important things in national parks. Okay, this is not a full-time gig in the sense that the government's going to do it forever. But these young men make money that they have to send home to their families. It puts food on the table, and it has the government paying people to do what we would call kind of menial work, but they're working. The FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, this is flat money. The federal government giving you money. Do you have to work for it? No, you don't. Do you have to do anything really to keep it? No, you don't. We are basically going to throw you money. And why are we going to throw you money? We're going to throw it to you to try and get the economy moving from below. We're going to prime the pump. Give people money. They go, they spend it in a store. The store has to take on more staff. They have more employees. Then the factory has to produce more goods. And eventually that kind of churning, I'm waving my arms, churning should stir the economy up from below. About $2 billion given out through those programs over time. The Social Security Administration is a long-term, I beg your pardon, reform that comes after criticism that there is no New Deal for the elderly. So if you look down on your page here, you'll find Dr. Charles Townsend. Townsend had said that all of these government programs are fantastic, but what do you got for me? What do you got for a retired old man? And Townsend wanted the government to give a chunk of money to elderly people that they had to spend every month. And Social Security is kind of like that. You're paying into it over the course of your life. Your employer pays into it. And at the end of your life, the government pays you a check every month so that you have a basic standard of living. Now, the program has enormous flaws, but what Roosevelt would tell you is that it's the government assuring that as people get towards their golden years of life, that they don't have a horrendous living situation. The TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, is really a regional relief plan that goes into the Tennessee Valley area, the southeastern part of the United States, and dams the rivers there and electrifies the area. It brings electricity to an area that really wasn't electrified before. It puts people to work building the dams and then running the dams, and it makes the southeastern United States sort of more up to date. It brings them into the era that the rest of the United States was in. So all of those New Deal programs are designed to in some way get the government more actively engaged in what you're doing. The next section says, would each of the following say the New Deal was too liberal or too conservative? The Supreme Court's going to say it's too liberal. The Supreme Court is chock full of Republicans put in there by the 20s presidents. Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover are going to say, you can't do this. You can't do this. You can't change what the government does in society, and they're going to knock down a whole bunch of New Deal legislation, and eventually FDR is going to replace a whole bunch of justices, and that's going to change that. Is that the right thing to do? That's not the debate today. Huey Long would say it's too conservative. Okay? Basically, the government should be doing more. We should take all the money from the rich people. We should have this program called, Share the Wealth. Isn't that a great sound? Share the wealth. Share the wealth. That's creepy. Okay? We should take all of this money from people who make over $1 million and we should contribute it to a fund and share it among society. Now, Huey Long's an enormously popular guy. The program doesn't work. It doesn't work because the math doesn't run out. But over the course of time, what Huey Long is hoping to do is to create enough wealth that we can share it among the society and people would be prosperous. How did the government expand to meet the needs of World War II? The OPA, the Office of Price Administration, set prices, controlled wages, rationed goods to make sure that people didn't overconsume goods and that we had enough supplies to fight the war. The War Production Board worked with industry to make sure that industries did not have strikes, to make sure that there was a group of people who worked hard during the war to try and keep us on track for production. Keep in mind, this is the most hyper-productive history, or economy in American history, is that period during World War II. We are making things like nobody's business. The National War Labor Board, negotiating with different members within labor unions to make sure that they're happy, to make sure that they have the demands met that they need. About a minute left in the video. The overall theme of this video is that the government, over the course of the period of these 45 or 50 years, becomes more and more actively engaged in daily life. It does so primarily to try and right economic wrongs. It does so to try and increase the amount of control that the government has over the variables of life. The progressives really started this movement, and although progressivism proper dies out by about 1920, the idea of government activism is popular throughout the period up to the end of World War II. Okay? Once the U.S. government has expanded to meet the needs of people during crisis moments, whether that's World War I or the Depression or World War II, the question becomes, should it then contract back after those crises? And that's a question for another day. That's the first video.